resident bibliophile and royal witch, Empress Celestia Libri. Welcome to today's stream, everybody. We are doing ASMR-like reading of the Grimm's fairy tales. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I had gotten sick. I've done a few of these ASMR-like readings. Not too many of them thus far, but I had to take quite a break from doing these because with my illness in February, it affected my throat, and with it affecting my throat and having a cough and all of that, reading for or like talking for long periods was difficult. And I didn't want to be dealing with that with doing ASMR content because that's not very ASMR-y. So, yeah. So I took quite a break, quite the lengthy break from the ASMR-like reading. And I call it ASMR-like instead of just ASMR because I don't have an actual ASMR mic. So until I get myself an actual designated ASMR mic where I can really truly do ASMR stuff, I'm calling it ASMR like. So, yeah. So I've done a few of these reading streams already with going through all of the Grimm's fairy tales. In the book that I have, I'm on page 105. I'm on page 105 out of, let's see. Out of 508. So we've got a ways to go. This book will keep us busy for a while as far as ASMR-like reading goes. But yeah, I hope you're all doing well today, and hopefully, if you're here listening to this, that it's cozy enough for you. If you don't know too much about the Grimm's fairy tales, and you're here listening to this, just fair warning, a lot of the fairy tales are kind of bizarre. So, and not necessarily up to modern day thinking or standards or what have you. So just keep that in mind when listening to these. You might disagree with some of the stuff that's said in the stories, but you gotta remember these are old stories. So, we left off with, the next story in the book is called The Singing Bone. Let's see how long. Oh, this one's pretty short. Alright. Oh, and it starts off in the classic style. Once upon a time, great complaints were made in a certain country of a wild boar, which laid waste to the fields of the peasants, killed the cattle, and often tore to pieces the inhabitants. Oh my goodness. The king promised a great reward to whoever should free the land of this plague, but the beast was so big and strong that no one durst venture into the neighborhood of the forest where it raged. At last the king allowed it to be proclaimed that whoever should take or kill the wild boar should have his only daughter in marriage. Another classic fairy tale story plotline. Now there lived in this country 2 brothers, the sons of a poor man, and they each wished to undertake the venture. The elder, who was bold and brave out of pride, the younger, who was innocent and ignorant from a good heart. They agreed that they might the sooner find the boar that they should enter the forest on opposite sides, So the elder departed in the evening, and the other on the following morning. When the younger had gone a short way, a little dwarf stepped up to him, holding a black spear in his hand, and said, "I give you the spear, because your heart is innocent and good. With it you may boldly attack the boar, who can do you no harm." He thanked the dwarf, and taking the spear, went forth bravely. In a little while he perceived the wild boar, which ran straight at him, but he held the spear in front of his body, so that in its blind fury it rushed on so rashly that its heart was pierced quite through. Then he took the beast upon his shoulder, and went homewards to show it to the king. However, just as he came out on the other side of the forest, there stood on the outskirts a house, where the people were making merry, dancing, and drinking. His elder brother was amongst them, exciting his courage by wine, and never thinking at all that the boar might be killed by any other than himself. As soon, therefore, as he saw his younger brother coming out of the forest, laden with his booty, his envious and ill-natured heart had no rest. Still he called to him, "Come in here, my dear brother, and rest, and strengthen yourself with a cup of wine." Uh-oh. I think I can see where this might be going. The younger brother, suspecting no evil, went in and related his story of the good little dwarf who had given him the spear wherewith he had killed the boar. The elder brother detained him till evening, and then they went away together. But when they came into the darkness to a bridge over a stream, the elder, letting his brother pass on before till he came to the middle of the bridge, gave him a blow which felled him dead. Yikes! Then he buried him in the sand below the bridge, and taking the boar, brought it to the king, representing that he had killed it, and so received in marriage the princess. He declared, moreover, that the boar had torn in pieces the body of his younger brother, and as he did not come back, everyone believed the tale to be true. Man, that's insane. But because nothing is hid from God's sight, so also this black deed at last came to light. Many years after, as a peasant was driving his herd across the brook, he saw lying in the sand below a snow-white bone, which he thought would make a good mouthpiece. So he stepped down, took it up, and fashioned it into a mouthpiece for his horn. But as soon as he blew through it for the first time, to the great astonishment of the herdsman, the bone began to sing of itself. "My brother slew me and buried my bones under the sand and under the stones. I killed the boar as he came from his lair, but he won the prize of the lady fair." "What a wonderful little bone!" exclaimed the herdsman. "It sings of itself. I must take it to the king." As soon as he came before the king, it began again to repeat its song, and the king understood it perfectly. So he caused the earth below the bridge to be dug up, and there all the bones of the younger brother came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed, and for his punishment he was sewed up in a sack and drowned. And the bones of the other brother were placed in a splendid tomb in the churchyard. Whoa! That's an ending for you. Possibly a little dark? Oh my. And so is the story of the singing bone. All right. Let's see, the next story is definitely a little bit lengthier. All right. It's called The Giant with the Three Golden Hairs. And hairs being like hairs on your head, not hairs as in like rabbits. So the giant with the 3 golden hairs. There was once upon a time a poor woman whose son was born with a caul. It has an asterisk here by the word caul. It means part of the membrane enclosing the fetus left over the baby's head at birth, once thought to bring good luck. And so it was foretold of him that in his 14th year he should marry the king's daughter at the age of 14. It's a bit young. As it happened, the king soon after came into the village, quite unknown to anyone, and when he asked the people what news there was, they answered, "A few days since, a child with a caul was born, which is a sure sign that he will be very lucky, and indeed it has been foretold of him that in his 14th year he will marry the king's daughter." The king had a wicked heart, and was disturbed concerning this prophecy. So he went to the parents and said to them in a most friendly manner, "Give me up your child, and I will take care of him." At first they refused, but the stranger begged for it with much gold, and so at last they consented and gave him the child, thinking, "It is a luck child, and therefore everything must go well with it." The king laid the child in a box and rode away till he came to a deep water, into which he threw the box, saying to himself, "From this unsought-for bridegroom have I now freed my daughter." The box, however, did not sink, but floated along like a boat, and not one drop of water penetrated it. It floated at last down to a mill 2 miles from the king's palace, and in the mill dam it stuck fast. The miller's boy, who was fortunately standing there, observed it, and drew it ashore with a hook, expecting to find a great treasure. When, however, he opened the box, he saw a beautiful child, alive and merry. He took it to the people at the mill, who, having no children, adopted it for their own, saying, "God has sent it to us." And they took good care of it, and it grew up full of virtues. It happened one day that the king went into the mill for shelter during a thunderstorm, and asked the people whether the boy was their child. "No," they answered, "he is a foundling, who 14 years ago floated into our dam in a box, which the miller's boy drew out of the water." The king observed at once that it was no other than the luck child whom he had thrown into the water, and so said to them, "Good people, could not the youth carry a letter to my wife the queen? If so, I will give him 2 pieces of gold for a reward." "As my lord the king commands," they replied, and bade the youth get ready. Then the king wrote a letter to the queen, wherein he said, "So soon as this boy arrives with this letter, let him be killed and buried, and let all be done before I return." Yikes. The youth set out on his journey with the letter, but he lost himself, and at evening came into a great forest. In the gloom he saw a little light, and going up to it he found a cottage, into which he went, and perceived an old woman sitting by the fire. As soon as she saw the lad, she was terrified and exclaimed, "Why do you come here, and what would you do?" "I am come from the mill," he answered, "and am going to my lady the queen, to carry a letter, but because I have lost my way in this forest, I wish to pass the night here." "Poor boy," said the woman, "you have come to a den of robbers who, when they return, will murder you." "Uh-oh. Out of the frying pan and into the fire." "Let who will come," he replied. "I am not afraid. I am so weary that I can go no further." And stretching himself upon a bench, he went to sleep. Presently the robbers entered and asked in a rage what strange lad was lying there. "Ah," said the old woman, "it is an innocent youth who has lost himself in the forest, and whom I have taken in out of compassion. He carries with him a letter to the queen." The robbers seized the letter and read it, and understood that as soon as the youth arrived he was to be put to death. Then the robbers took compassion on him also, and the captain tore up the letter and wrote another, wherein he declared that the youth on his arrival was to be married to the princess. Nice. They let him sleep quietly on his bench till the morning, and as soon as he awoke, they gave him the letter and showed him the right road. When the queen received the letter, she did as it commanded, and caused a splendid marriage feast to be prepared, and the princess was given in marriage to the luck child, who, since he was both young and handsome, pleased her well, and they were all very happy. Some little time afterwards the king returned to his palace, and found the prophecy fulfilled, and his daughter married to the luck child. "How did this happen?" he asked. "In my letter I gave quite another command." Then the queen handed him the letter that he might read it for himself, what it stated. Then the king perceived that it had been forged by another person, and he asked the youth what he had done with the letter that had been entrusted to him, that he had brought another. "I know nothing about it," he replied. "It must have been changed in the forest when I passed the night." Inflamed with rage, the king answered, "Thou shalt not escape so easily. He who would have my daughter must fetch for me 3 golden hairs from the head of the giant. Bring thou to me what I desire. Then shalt thou receive my daughter." The king hoped by this means to get rid of him, but he answered, "The 3 golden hairs I will fetch, for I fear not the giant." And so he took leave and began his wanderings. The road led him by a large town, where the watchman at the gate asked him what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," replied the youth. "Then you can do us a kindness," said the watch, "if you tell us the reason why the fountain in our marketplace, out of which wine used to flow, now all at once does not even give water." "Then you shall know," was the answer, "but you must wait till I return." Then he went on further and came to a rather large city, where the watchman asked as before what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," he replied. "Then you can do us a kindness, if you tell us the reason why a tree growing in our town, which used to bear golden apples, does not now even have any leaves." "That you shall know," replied the youth, "if you wait till I return." And so saying, he went on further till he came to a great lake, over which it was necessary that he should pass. The ferryman asked him what trade he understood and what he knew. "I know everything," he replied. "Then," said the ferryman, "you can do me a kindness if you tell me why, for ever and ever, I am obliged to row backwards and forwards, and am never to be released." "You shall learn the reason why," replied the youth, "but wait till I return." As soon as he got over the water, he found the entrance into the giant's kingdom. It was black and gloomy, and the giant was not at home, but his old grandmother was sitting there in an immense armchair. "What do you want?" said she, looking at him fixedly. "I want 3 golden hairs from the head of the king of these regions," replied the youth, "else I cannot obtain my bride." "That is a bold request," said the woman, "for if he comes home and finds you here, it will be a bad thing for you, but still you can remain, and I will see if I can help you." Then she changed him into an ant, and told him to creep within the fold of her gown, where he would be quite safe. "Yes," he said, "that is all very well, but there are 3 things I am desirous of knowing. Why a fountain which used to sprout wine is now dry, and does not even give water. why a tree which used to bear golden apples does not now have leaves, and why a ferryman is always rowing backwards and forwards and never gets released. Those are quite difficult questions, replied the old woman, but do you keep quiet and pay attention to what the king says when I pluck each of the 3 golden hairs. As soon as evening came, the giant returned, and scarcely had he entered when he remarked that the air was not quite pure. I smell the flesh of a man, he exclaimed. All is not right. Then he peeped into every corner and looked about, but could find nothing. Presently his old grandmother began to scold, screaming, There now, just as I have dusted and put everything in order, you are pulling them all about again. You are forever having man's flesh in your nose. Sit down and eat your supper. When he had finished, he felt tired, and the old woman took his head in her lap and said she would comb his hair a bit. Presently he yawned, then winked, and at last snored. Then she plucked out a golden hair and laid it down beside her. Bah! Cried the king. What are you about? I have had a bad dream, answered the old woman, and so I plucked one of your hairs. What did you dream then? Asked he. I dreamt that a market fountain, which used to spout wine, is dried up and does not even give water. What is the matter with it, pray? Why, if you must know, answered he, there sits a toad under a stone in the spring, which if anyone kills, wine will gush out as before. Then the old woman went on combing till he went to sleep again, and snored so that the window shook. Presently she pulled out a second hair. Confound it! What are you about? Exclaimed the king in a passion. Don't be angry, said she. I did it in a dream. What did you dream this time? He asked. I dreamt that in a certain royal city there grew a fruit tree, which formerly bore golden apples, but now has not a leaf upon it. What is the cause of it? Why, replied the king, at the root a mouse is gnawing, but if they kill it, golden apples will grow again. If not, the mouse will gnaw till the tree dies altogether. However, let me go to sleep in peace now, for if you disturb me again, you will catch a box on the ears. Nevertheless, the old woman, when she had rocked him again to sleep, plucked out a third golden hair. Up jumped the king in a fury, and would have ill-treated her, but she pacified him and said, Who can help bad dreams? What did you dream this time? He asked, still curious to know. I dreamt of a ferryman who is forever compelled to row backwards and forwards, and will never be released. What is the reason thereof? Oh, you simpleton, answered the giant. When one comes who wants to cross over, he must give the oar into his hand. Then will the other be obliged to go to and fro, and he will be free. Now, since the old woman had plucked the 3 golden hairs and had received answers to the 3 questions, she let the giant lie in peace, and he slept on till daybreak. As soon as he went out in the morning, the old woman took the ant out of the fold of her gown and restored him again to his human form. There you have the 3 golden hairs from the king's head, and what he replied to the 3 questions you have just heard. Yes, I have heard and will well remember, said the luck child, and thanking the old woman for her assistance in his trouble, he left those regions well pleased that he had been so lucky in everything. When he came to the ferryman, he had to give him the promised answer, but he said, First row me over, and then I will tell you how you may be freed. And as soon as they reached the opposite side, he gave him the advice, When another comes this way and wants to pass over, give him the oar in his hand. Then he went on to the first city where stood the barren tree, and where the watchman waited for the answer. So he said to him, "Kill the mouse which gnaws at the root of the tree, and then it will again bear golden apples." The watchman thanked him and gave him for a reward 2 asses laden with gold, which followed him. Next he came to the other city, where the dry fountain was, and he told the watchman as the giant had said, "Under a stone in the spring there sits a toad, which you must uncover and kill, and then wine will flow again as before." The watchman thanked him and gave him, as the other had done, 2 asses laden with gold. Now the lucky youth soon reached home, and his dear bride was very glad when she saw him return, and heard how capitally everything had gone with him. He brought the king what he had desired, the 3 golden hairs from the head of the giant. And when his majesty saw the 4 asses laden with gold, he was quite pleased, and said, "Now are the conditions fulfilled, and you may have my daughter. But tell me, dear son-in-law, whence comes all this gold? This is indeed bountiful treasure." "I was ferried over a river," he replied, "and there I picked it up, for it lies upon the shore like sand." "Can I not fetch some as well?" asked the king, feeling quite covetous. "As much as you like. There is a ferryman who will row you across, and then you can fill your sacks on the other side." The covetous king set out in great haste upon his journey, and as soon as he came to the river, beckoned to the ferryman to take him over. The man came and bade him step into his boat, and as soon as they reached the opposite shore, the ferryman put the oar in his hand and sprang on shore himself. So the king was obliged to take his place, and there he is obliged to row to and fro forever for his sins. And there he still rows, for no one has yet come to take the oar from him. Dang. Okay, so that boy was smart. Nice. Bravo. Bravo, kid. Oh, goodness. Alright, I'm going to take a little bit of a break here. Get myself some water. Stretching a little bit. Oh. Okay. Actually, you know what? I need a little bit more water. There we go. Hopefully the consistent rain in the background isn't too annoying for you. All right. The next story that we have is called The Handless Maiden. Interesting. Alright. The Handless Maiden. A certain miller had fallen by degrees into great poverty, until he had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree. One day, when he was going into the forest to cut wood, an old man, whom he had never seen before, stepped up to him and said, "Why do you trouble yourself with chopping wood? I will make you rich if you will promise me what stands behind your mill." The miller thought to himself that it could be nothing but his apple tree, so he said, "Yes," and concluded the bargain with the strange man. The other, however, laughed derisively and said, "After 3 years I will come and fetch what belongs to me." And then he went away. As soon as the miller reached home, his wife came to him and said, "Tell me, husband, whence comes this sudden gold into our house? All at once every chest and cupboard is filled, and yet no man has brought any in. I cannot tell how it has happened." The miller in reply told her, "It comes from a strange lord, whom I met in the forest, who offered me great treasure, and I promised him in return what stands behind the mill, for we can very well spare the great apple tree." "Ah, my husband," exclaimed his wife, "it is the evil spirit whom you have seen. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who was behind the mill sweeping the yard." The miller's daughter was a beautiful and pious maiden, and during all the 3 years lived in the fear of God without sin. When the time was up, and the day came when the evil one was to fetch her, she washed herself quite clean and made a circle around her with chalk. Quite early came the evil one, but he could not approach her, so in a rage he said to the miller, "Take away from her all water, that she may not be able to wash herself, else I have no power over her." The miller did so, for he was afraid. The next morning came the evil one again, but she had leapt upon her hands so that they were quite clean. Then he was baffled again, and in his anger he said to the miller, "Cut off both her hands, or else I cannot now obtain her." That's insane. What the? Wow. That's just messed up. Where did I leave off? Jeez. Hold on a second. I gotta find my place. Oh, here we go. Found it. The miller was horrified and said, yeah, no kidding, he was horrified. "How can I cut off the hands of my own child?" But the evil one pressed him, saying, "If you do not, you are mine, and I will take you yourself away." At last the miller promised, and he went to the maiden and said, "My child, if I do not cut off both your hands, the evil one will carry me away. And in my terror I have promised him. Now help me in my trouble, and forgive me for the wickedness I am about to do to you." She replied, "Dear father, do with me what you will. I am your daughter." Thereupon she laid down both her hands, and her father cut them off. For the 3rd time now the evil one came, but the maiden had let fall so many tears upon her arms that they were both quite clean. So he was obliged to give her up, and after this lost all power over her. The miller now said to her, "I have received so much good through you, my daughter, that I will care for you most dearly all your life long." But she answered, "Here I cannot remain. I will wander forth into the world, where compassionate men will give me as much as I require." Then she had her arms bound behind her back, and Sunrise departed on her journey, and walked the whole day long till night fell. At that time she arrived at a royal garden, and by the light of the moon she saw a tree standing there bearing most beautiful fruits, but she could not enter, for there was water all around. Since, however, she had walked the whole day without tasting a morsel, she was tormented by hunger, and said to herself, "Ah, would I were there, that I might eat of the fruit, else shall I perish with hunger." So she kneeled and prayed to God, and all at once an angel came down, who made a passage through the water, so that the ground was dry for her to pass over. Then she went into the garden, and the angel with her. There she saw a tree full of beautiful pears, but they were all numbered. So she stepped up and ate one to appease her hunger, but no more. The gardener perceived her do it, but because the angel stood by, he was afraid, and thought the maiden was a spirit. So he remained quiet and did not address her. As soon as she had eaten the pear, she was satisfied, and went and hid herself under the bushes. The next morning the king to whom the garden belonged came down, and counting the pears, found that one was missing, and he asked the gardener whither it was gone. The gardener replied, "Last night a spirit came, who had no hands, and ate the pear with her mouth." The king then asked, "How did the spirit come through the water, and whither did it go after it had eaten the pear?" An angel clothed in snow-white garments came down from heaven, and made a passage through the waters, so that the spirit walked through the ditch. And because it was an angel, I was afraid, and neither called out nor questioned it. And as soon as it had finished the fruit, it returned as it came. The king said, "If it be as you say, I will this night watch with you." As soon as it was dark, the king came into the garden, bringing with him a priest, who was to address the spirit, and all three sat down under the tree. About midnight the maiden crept out from under the bushes, and again ate with her mouth a pear off the tree, whilst the angel clothed in white stood by her. Then the priest went towards her and said, "Art thou come from God, or from earth? Art thou a spirit, or a human being?" She replied, "I am no spirit, but a poor maiden, deserted by all, save God alone." The king said, "If you are forsaken by all the world, yet will I not forsake you." And he took her with him to his royal palace, and because she was so beautiful and pious, he loved her with all his heart, and ordered silver hands to be made for her, and made for her his bride. After a year had passed by, the king was obliged to go to war, so he commended the young queen to the care of his mother, and told her to write him word if she had a child born, and to pay her especial attention. Soon after the words the queen bore a fine boy, so the old mother wrote a letter to her son containing the joyous news. The messenger, however, rested on his way by a brook, and being weary of his long journey, fell asleep. Then came the evil one, who had always been trying to do some evil to the queen, and changed the letter for another, wherein it was said that the queen had brought a changeling into the world. As soon as the king had read this letter, he was frightened and much troubled. Nevertheless, he wrote an answer to his mother, that she should take great care of the queen until his arrival. The messenger went back with this letter, but on his way rested at the same spot and went to sleep. Then the evil one came a second time and put another letter in his pocket, wherein it was said that the queen and her child should be killed. When the old mother received this letter, she was struck with horror and could not believe it, so she wrote another letter to the king, but she received no other answer, for the evil one again placed a false letter in the messenger's pocket, and in this last it said that she should preserve the tongue and eyes of the queen for a sign that she had fulfilled his commands. The old mother was sorely grieved to shed innocent blood, so she caused a calf to be fetched by night, and cut off its tongue, and took out its eyes. Then she said to the queen, I cannot let you be killed as the king commands, but you must remain here no longer. Go forth with your child into the wide world, and never return here again. Thus saying, she bound the child upon the young queen's back, and the poor wife went away weeping bitterly. So she entered a large wild forest, and there she fell upon her knees and prayed to God, and the angel appeared and led her to a little cottage, and over the door was a shield inscribed with the words, Here may everyone live freely. Out of the house came a snow-white maiden, who said, Welcome, Lady Queen, and led her in. Then she took the little child from the queen's back and gave it some nourishment, and laid it on a beautifully covered bed. Presently the queen asked, How do you know that I am a queen? And the maiden answered, I am an angel sent from God to tend you and your child. And in this cottage she lived 7 years, and was well cared for, and through God's mercy to her, on account of her piety, her hands grew again as before. Wow. Meanwhile, the king had come home again, and his first thought was to see his wife and child. Then his mother began to weep and said, You wicked husband, why did you write to me that I should put to death 2 innocent souls? And showing him the 2 letters which the evil one had forged, she continued, I have done as you commanded. And she brought him the tokens, the 2 eyes and the tongue. Then the king began to weep so bitterly for his dear wife and son that the old mother pitied him and said, Be comforted, she lives yet. I caused a calf to be slain, from whom I took these tokens. Put the child I bound on your wife's back, and I bade them go forth into the wide world, and she promised never to return here because you were so wrathful against her. So far as heaven is blue, exclaimed the king, I will go, and neither will I eat nor drink till I have found again my dear wife and child, if they have not perished of hunger by this time. Thereupon the king set out, and for 7 long years sought his wife in every stony cleft and rocky cave, but found her not. And he began to think she must have perished, and all this time he neither ate nor drank, but God sustained him. At last he came into a large forest, and found there the tiny cottage, whereupon the shield was with the words, Here may every one live freely. Out of the house came the white maiden, and she took him by the hand, and leading him in, said, Be welcome, great king, whence comest thou? He replied, For 7 long years have I sought everywhere for my wife and child, but I have not succeeded. Then the angel offered him meat and drink, but he refused both, and would only rest a little while. So he lay down to sleep and covered his face with a napkin. Now went the angel into the chamber where sat the queen with her son, whom she usually called Sorrowful, and said to her, Come down with your child, your husband is here. So she went to where he lay, and the napkin fell from his face. So the queen said, Sorrowful, pick up the napkin and cover again your father's face. The child did as he was bid, and the king, who heard in his slumber what passed, let the napkin again fall from off his face. At this the boy became impatient and said, Dear mother, how can I cover my father's face? I have indeed a father on this earth. I have learnt the prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, and you have told me my father was in heaven. The good God, how can I talk to this wild man? He is not my father. As the king heard this, he raised himself up and asked the queen who she was. The queen replied, I am your wife, and this is your son, Sorrowful." But when he saw her human hands, he said, "My wife had silver hands." "The merciful God," said the queen, "has caused my hands to grow again." And the angel, going into her chamber, brought out the silver hands and showed them to him. Now he perceived that they were certainly his dear wife and child, and he kissed them gladly, saying, "A heavy stone is taken from my heart." And after eating a meal together with the angel, they went home to the king's mother. Their arrival caused great rejoicings everywhere, and the king and queen celebrated their marriage again, and ever afterwards lived happily together to the end of their lives. Yay! What a story, though. Goodness. At the beginning, anyways. Interesting, the title of this next one. It's called Clever Alice. Let's find out, shall we? Once upon a time, there was a man who had a daughter who was called Clever Alice. And when she was grown up, her father said, "We must see about her marrying." "Yes," replied the mother, "when one comes who may be worthy of her." At last a certain youth, by name Hans, came from a distance to make a proposal for her, but he put in one condition, that the clever Alice should also be very prudent. "Oh," said her father, "she has got a head full of brains." And the mother added, "Ah, she can see the wind blow up the street and hear the flies cough." "Very well," replied Hans, "but if she is not very prudent, I will not have her." Soon afterwards they sat down to dinner, and her mother said, "Alice, go down into the cellar and draw some beer." So Clever Alice took the jug down from the wall, and went into the cellar, jerking the lid up and down on her way to pass away the time. As soon as she got downstairs, she drew a stool and placed it before the cask in order that she might not have to stoop, whereby she might do some injury to her back and give it an undesirable bend. Then she placed the can before her and turned the tap, and while the beer was running, as she did not wish her eyes to be idle, she looked about upon the wall above and below, and presently perceived, after much peeping into this and that corner, a hatchet which the bricklayers had left behind, sticking out of the ceiling right above her. At the sight of this, the clever Alice began to cry, saying, "Oh, if I marry Hans and we have a child and he grows up, and we send him into the cellar to draw beer, the hatchet will fall upon his head and kill him." And so saying, she sat there weeping with all her might over the impending misfortune. Meanwhile the good folks upstairs were waiting for the beer, but as Clever Alice did not come, her mother told the maid to go and see what she was stopping for. The maid went down into the cellar and found Alice sitting before the cask crying heartily, and she asked, "Alice, what are you weeping about?" "Ah," she replied, "have I not cause? If I marry Hans and we have a child and he grow up, and we send him here to draw beer, the hatchet will fall upon his head and kill him." "Oh," said the maid, "what a clever Alice we have." And sitting down she began to weep too for the misfortune that was to happen. After a while, and the maid did not return, the good folks above began to feel very thirsty. And so the husband told the boy to go down into the cellar and see what had become of Alice and the maid. The boy went down, and there sat Clever Alice and the maid both crying, so he asked the reason. And Alice told him the same tale of the hatchet that was to fall on her child as she had told the maid. When she had finished, the boy exclaimed, What a clever Alice we have," and fell weeping and howling with the others. Upstairs they were still waiting, and the husband said, when the boy did not return, "Do you go down, wife, into the cellar and see why Alice stops." So she went down, and finding all three sitting there crying, asked the reason, and Alice told her about the hatchet which must inevitably fall upon the head of her son. Then the mother likewise exclaimed, "Oh, what a clever Alice we have," and sitting down began to weep with the others. Meanwhile the husband waited for his wife's return, but at last he felt so very thirsty that he said, "I must go down myself into the cellar and see what Alice stops for." As soon as he entered the cellar, there he found the four sitting and crying together, and when he heard the reason, he also exclaimed, "Oh, what a clever Alice we have," and sat down to cry with the others. All this time the bridegroom above sat waiting, but when nobody returned, he thought they must be waiting for him, and so he went down to see what was the matter. When he entered, there sat the five, crying and groaning, each one in a louder key than his neighbor. "What misfortune has happened?" he asked. "Ah, dear Hans," cried Alice, "if we should marry one another, and I have a child, and he grow up, and we perhaps send him down here to tap the beer, the hatchet which has been left sticking there may fall on his head and so kill him. And do you not think that enough to weep about?" "Now," said Hans, "more prudence than this is not necessary for my housekeeping, because you are such a clever Alice. I will have you for my wife." And taking her hand, he led her home and celebrated the wedding directly. "Are you kidding me? Just take the stinking hatchet out of the ceiling." Hello? That would be the prudent thing to do. You want to talk about prudence? Take the stinking hatchet out. Duh. Anyway. After they had been married a little while, Hans said one morning, "Wife, I will go out to work and earn some money. Do you go into the field and gather some corn wherewith to make bread." "Yes," she answered, "I will do so, dear Hans." And when he was gone, she cooked herself a nice mess of pottage to take with her. As she came to the field, she said to herself, "What shall I do? Shall I cut first or eat first? Ah, I will eat first." Then she ate up the contents of her pot, and when it was finished, she thought to herself, "Now shall I reap first or sleep first? Then I think I will have a nap. I think I will have a nap." And so she laid herself down amongst the corn and went to sleep. Meanwhile Hans returned home, but Alice did not come, and so he said, "Oh, what a prudent Alice I have. She is so industrious that she does not even come home to eat anything." By and by, however, evening came on, and still she did not return. So Hans went out to see how much she had reaped, but behold, nothing at all, and there lay Alice fast asleep among the corn. So home he ran very fast, and brought a net with little bells hanging on it, which he threw over her head while she still slept on. When he had done this, he went back again and shut to the house door, and seating himself on his stool, began working very industriously. At last, when it was quite dark, the clever Alice awoke, and as soon as she stood up, the net fell all over her hair, and the bells jingled at every step she took. This quite frightened her, and she began to doubt whether she was really clever Alice or no, and said to herself, "Am I she, or am I not?" This question she could not answer, and she stood still a long while considering. At last she thought she would go home and ask whether she were really herself, supposing they would be able to tell. When she came to the house door, it was shut, so she tapped at the window and asked, "Hans, is Alice within?" "Yes," he replied, "she is." Now she was really terrified, and exclaiming, "Ah, heaven, then I am not Alice." She ran up to another house, but as soon as the folks within heard the jingling of the bells, they would not open the doors, and so nobody would receive her. Then she ran straight away from the village, and no one has ever seen her since. Wow. That's a story, all right. That's a weird one. And this is why I gave the warning. Because some of these old fairy tales are quite strange. That is so weird. Okay. I'm going to have some more water before going on to the next story. The next story is a little bit lengthy. Goodness. All right. The next one is titled The Table, the Ass, and the Stick. That's another way that you can tell that these stories are old, is because they don't refer to donkeys as donkeys. They refer to them as asses. They call them ass instead of donkey. Anyway, so the table, the ass, and the stick. A long while ago, there lived a tailor who had 3 sons, but only a single goat, which, as it had to furnish milk for all, was obliged to have good fodder every day, and to be led into the meadow for it. This the sons had to do by turns, and one morning the eldest took the goat into the churchyard, where grew the finest herbs, which he let it eat, and then frisked about undisturbed until the evening. When it was time to return, and then he asked, "Goat, are you satisfied?" The goat replied, "I am satisfied quiet. No more can I bite." "Then come home," said the youth, and catching hold of the rope, he led it to the stall and made it fast. "Now," said the old tailor, "has the goat had its proper food?" "Yes," replied the son, "it has eaten all it can." The father, however, would see for himself, and so, going into the stall, he stroked the goat and asked it whether it was satisfied. The goat replied, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the graves, and found not a single leaf." "What do I hear?" exclaimed the tailor, and he ran up to his son and said, "Oh, you bad boy, you said the goat was satisfied, and then brought it away hungry." And taking the yard measure down from the wall, he hunted his son out of the house in a rage. Don't do that to your children. The following morning was the second son's turn, and he picked out a place in the garden hedge where some very fine herbs grew, which the goat ate up entirely. When in the evening the wanted return, that seems like poor English. He asked the goat first whether it seemed satisfied, and it replied as before, "I am satisfied quite, no more." can I bite?" "Then come home," said the youth, and drove it to its stall and tied it fast. Soon after the old tailor asked, "Has the goat had its usual food?" "Oh, yes," answered the son, "it ate up all the leaves." But the tailor would see for himself, and so went into the stall and asked the goat whether it had had enough. "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the hedge and found not a single leaf," replied the animal. "The wicked scamp!" exclaimed the tailor, "to let such a capital animal starve." And running indoors, he drove his son out of the house with his yard measure. It was now the third son's turn, and he, willing to make a good beginning, sought some bushes full of beautifully tender leaves, of which he let the goat plentifully partake, and at evening time, when he wished to go home, he asked the goat the same question as the others had done, and received the same answer. I am satisfied quite, no more can I bite." So then he led it home, and tied it up in its stall, and presently the old man came, and asked whether the goat had had its regular food, and the youth replied yes, but he would go and see for himself, and then the wicked beast told him, as it had done before, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the bush, and found not a single leaf." "Oh, the scoundrel!" exclaimed the tailor in a rage. "He is just as careless and forgetful as the others. He shall no longer eat of my bread." And rushing into the house, he dealt with his youngest son such tremendous blows with the yard measure that the boy ran quite away. The old tailor was now left alone with his goat, and the following morning he went to the stall and fondled the animal, saying, "Come, my dear little creature, I will lead you myself into the meadow." And taking the rope, he brought it to some green lettuces, and let it feed to its heart's content. When the evening arrived, he asked it, as his sons had done before, whether it were satisfied, and it replied, "I am satisfied quite, no more can I bite." So he led it home and tied it up in the stall, but before he left it, he turned round and asked once more, "Are you quite satisfied?" The malicious brute answered in the same manner as before, "Whereof should I be satisfied? I only jumped about the green, and found not a single leaf." As soon as the tailor heard this, he was thunderstruck, and perceived directly that he had driven away his 3 sons without cause. "Stop a bit, you ungrateful beast," he exclaimed. "To drive you away will be too little. I will mark you so that you shall no more dare to show yourself among honorable tailors." So saying, he sprang up with great speed, and fetching a razor, shaved the goat's head as bare as the palm of his hand. And because the yard measure was too honorable for such service, he laid hold of a whip, and gave the animal such hearty cuts with it that it ran off as fast as possible. This is, of course, very ill behavior. We don't agree with any of this. Remember, this is just an old fairy tale story. When the old man sat down again in his house, he fell into great grief, and would have been only too happy to have had his 3 sons back, but no one knew whither they had wandered. The eldest, however, had gone apprentice to a joiner, and it has an asterisk by the word joiner. A joiner is a carpenter, with whom he worked industriously and cheerfully, and when his time was out, his master presented him with a table, which had certainly a very ordinary appearance, and was made of common wood, but it had one excellent quality. If its owner placed it before him, and said, "Table, cover thyself," the good table was at once covered with a fine cloth, and plates, and knives, and forks, and dishes of roast and baked meat took their places on it, and a great glass filled with red wine, which gladdened one's heart. Our young fellow thought, "Herewith you have enough for your lifetime," and went full of glee about the world, never troubling himself whether the inn were good or bad, or whether it contained anything or nothing. Whenever he pleased, he went to no inn at all, but in the field or wood, or any meadow, in fact, just where he liked, to take the table off his back and set it before him, saying, "Table, cover thyself." He had all he could desire to eat and drink. At last it came into his head that he would return to his father, whose anger he thought would be abated by time, and with whom he might live very comfortably with his excellent table. It fell out that on his journey home he one evening arrived at an inn which was full of people, who bade him welcome and invited him to come in and eat with them, or he would get nothing at all. But our joiner replied, "No, I will not take a couple of bites with you. You must rather be my guests." At this the others laughed, and thought he was making game of them, but he placed his wooden table in the middle of the room, and said, "Table, cover thyself." And in the twinkling of an eye it was set out with meats as good as any that the host could have furnished, and the smell of which mounted very savory into the noses of the guests. "Be welcome, my friends," or good friends, said the joiner, and the guests which they saw, when they saw he was in earnest, waited not to be asked twice, but quickly seating themselves, set to valiantly with their knives. What made them most wonder, however, was that when any dish became empty, another full one instantly took its place, and the landlord, who stood in the corner looking on, thought to himself, "You could make good use of such a cook as that in your trade," but he said nothing. Meanwhile the joiner and his companions sat making merry till late at night, but at last they went to bed, and the joiner too, who placed his wishing table against the wall before going to sleep. The landlord, however, could not get to sleep, for his thoughts troubled him, and suddenly remembering that there stood in his lumber room an old table which was useless, he went and fetched it, and put it in the place of the wishing table. The next morning the joiner counted out his lodging money, and placed the table on his back, ignorant that it had been changed, and went his way. The odds of like an identical looking table, like fairly identical, it would have to be like really, really close for you to not be suspicious that like your table doesn't look different. Just saying. Just saying. At noonday he reached his father's house, and was received with great joy. "Now, my dear son," said the old man, "what have you learned?" "I have become a joiner, father." "A capital trade, too. But what have you brought home with you from your travels?" "The best thing I have brought," said the youth, "is this table." The father looked at it on every side, and said, "You have made a very bad hand of that. It is an old, worthless table." "But," interrupted his son, "it is one which covers itself, and when I place it before me and say, 'Table, cover thyself,' it is instantly filled with the most savory meats and wine, which will make your heart sing. Just invite your friends and acquaintances, and you shall soon see how they will be refreshed and revived." Uh-oh. That's gonna be embarrassing. Yikes. As soon then as the company was arrived, he placed his table in the middle of the room, and called out to it to cover itself. But the table did not stir, and remained as empty as any other table which does not understand what is spoken. And the poor joiner at once perceived that the table was changed, and he was ashamed to appear thus like an impostor before the guests, who laughed at him, and were obliged to go home without eating or drinking. So the father took up his mending again, and stitched away as fast as ever, and the son was obliged to go and work for a master carpenter. Meanwhile the second son had been living with a miller, and learning his trade, And as soon as his time was up, his master said to him, "Because you have served me so well, I present you with this ass, which has a wonderful gift, although it neither can draw a wagon nor carry a sack." "For what, then, is it useful?" asked the youth. "It speaks gold," replied the miller. "If you tie a pocket under the chin and cry, 'Bricklebrit,' then the good beast will pour out gold coin like hail." "That is a very fine thing," thought the youth, and thanking the master, he went off upon his journey. Now, whenever he needed money, he had only to say to his ass, "Bricklebrit," and it rained down gold pieces, so that he had no other trouble than to pick them up again from the ground. Wherever he went, the best only was good enough for him, and the dearer it was the better, for he had always a full purse. When he had looked about him for some time in the world, he thought he would go and visit his father, whose anger, he supposed, had abated, and moreover, since he brought with him an ass of gold, he would no doubt receive him gladly. It so happened that he came to the very same inn where his brother's table had been changed, and as he came up, leading his ass by the hand, the landlord would have taken it and tied it up, but our young master said to him, "You need not trouble yourself. I will lead my grey beast myself into the stable and tie him, for I must now know where he stands." The landlord wondered at this, and he thought that one who looked after his own beast would not spend much. But presently our friend, dipping into his pocket and taking out 2 pieces of gold, gave them to him and bade him fetch the best he could. This made the landlord open his eyes, and he ran and fetched in a great hurry the best he could get. When he had finished his meal, the youth asked what further he was indebted, and the landlord, having no mind to spare him, said that a couple of gold pieces more was due. The youth felt in his pocket, but his money was just at an end, so he exclaimed, "Wait a bit, my landlord, I will go and fetch some gold," and taking the tablecloth with him, he went out. The landlord knew not what to think, but being covetous, he slinked out after the youth, and as he bolted the stable door, the landlord peeped through a hole in the wall. The youth spread the cloth beneath the ass and called out, "Bricklebrit," and in a moment the beast began to speak out gold, as if rain were falling. "By the powers!" exclaimed the landlord, "ducats are soon coined so. That is not a bad sort of purse." The youth now paid his bill and laid down to sleep, but in the middle of the night the landlord slipped into the stable and led away the mint master and tied up a different ass in its place. In the morning early the youth drove away with his ass, thinking it was his own, and at noonday he arrived at his father's, who was very glad to see him return and received him kindly. "What trade have you become?" asked the father. "The miller," was the reply. "And what have you brought home with you from your wanderings?" "Nothing but an ass." "Oh, there are plenty of that sort here now. It had far better been a goat," said the old man. "Yes," replied the son, "but this is no common animal, but one which, when I say Bricklebrit, speaks gold right and left. Just call your friends here, and I will make them all rich in a twinkling." "Well," exclaimed the tailor, "that would please me very well, and so I need not use my needle any more." And running out, he called together all his acquaintances. As soon as they were assembled, the young miller bade them make a circle, and spreading out a cloth, he brought the ass into the middle of the room. "Now, pay attention," said he to them, and called out, "Bricklebrit," but not a single gold piece fell, and it soon appeared that the ass did not understand, for it is not everyone that can be so taught. The poor young man began to make a long face when he saw that he had been deceived, and he was obliged to beg pardon of the guests, who were forced to return as poor as they came. So it happened that the old man had to take up his needle again, and the youth to bind himself to another master. Meanwhile, the third brother had gone to a turner, and a turner is one who turns objects on a lathe in order to shape them, to learn his trade, but he got on very slowly, as it is a very difficult art to acquire, and while he was there, his brother sent him word how badly things had gone with them, and how the landlord had robbed them with their wishing gifts on their return home. When the time came round that he had learnt everything and wished to leave, his master presented him with a sack, saying, "In it there lies a stick." "I will take the sack readily, for it may do me good service," replied the youth. "But what is the stick for? It only makes the sack heavier to carry." "That I will tell you. If anyone does you an injury, you have only to say, stick, out of the sack, and instantly the stick will spring out and dance about on the people's backs in such style that they will not be able to stir a finger for a week afterwards. And moreover, it will not leave off till you say, 'Stick, get back into the sack.'" Wow. Okay. The youth thanked him and hung the sack over his shoulders, and when any one came too near and wished to meddle with him, he said, "Stick, come out of the sack," and immediately it sprang out and began laying about it. And when he called it back, it disappeared so quickly that no one could tell where it came from. One evening he arrived at the inn where his brothers had been basely robbed, and laying his knapsack on the table, he began to talk of all the wonderful things he had seen in the world. "Yes," said he, "one may find, indeed, a table which supplies itself, and a golden ass, and such like things, all very good in their place, and I do not despise them, but they shrink into nothing beside the treasure which I carry with me in this sack." The landlord pricked up his ears, saying, "What on earth can it be?" But he thought to himself, "The sack is certainly full of precious stones, and I must manage to get hold of them, for all good things come in threes." As soon as it was bedtime, our youth stretched himself upon a bench and laid his sack down for a pillow. And when he appeared to be in a deep sleep, the landlord crept softly to him and began to pull very gently and cautiously at the sack to see if he could manage to draw it away and put another in its place. The young turner, however, had been waiting for him to do this, and just as the man gave a good pull, he exclaimed, "Stick, out of the sack with you." Immediately out it jumped, and thumped about on the landlord's back and ribs with a good will. The landlord began to cry for mercy, but the louder he cried, the more forcibly did the stick beat him on his back, until at last he fell exhausted to the ground. Then the turner said, "If you do not give up the table which feeds itself, and the golden ass that dance will commence again." "No, no," cried the landlord in a weak voice, "I will give them up with pleasure, but just let your horrible hobgoblin get back into his sack." "I will give you pardon if you do right, but take care what you are about," replied the turner, and he let him rest and bade the stick return. On the following morning the turner accordingly went away with the table and the ass on the road home to his father, who as soon as he saw him felt very glad, and asked what he had learned in foreign parts. "Dear father," replied he, "I have become a turner." "A difficult business that, but what have you brought back with you from your travels?" "A precious stick," replied the son, "a stick in this sack." "What?" exclaimed the old man, "a stick? Well, that is worth the trouble. Why, you can cut one from every tree. But not such a stick as this, for if I say, stick out of the sack, it instantly jumps out and executes such a dance upon the back of any one who would injure me, that at last he is beaten to the ground, crying for mercy. Do you see with this stick I have got back again the whole table and the golden ass, of which the thievish landlord robbed my brothers? Now let them both be summoned home, and invite all your acquaintances, and I will not only give them plenty to eat and drink, but pocketfuls of money. The old tailor would scarcely believe him, but nevertheless he called in his friends. Then the young turner placed a tablecloth in the middle of the room, and led on the ass, saying to his brother, Now, speak to him. The miller called out, Brickle-brick, and in a moment the gold pieces dropped down on the floor in a pelting shower, and so it continued until they had all so much that they could carry no more. I fancy my readers would have been very happy to have been there too. I did not make up that last sentence, by the way. That is actually in the book. After this the table was fetched in, and the joiner said, Table, cover thyself. And it was at once filled with the choicest dishes. Then they began such a meal as the tailor had never had before in his house, and the whole company remained till late at night, merry and jovial. The next day the tailor forsook his needle and thread, and put them all away with his measures and goose in a cupboard, and forever after lived happily and contentedly with his 3 sons. But now I must tell you what became of the goat, whose fault it was that the 3 brothers were driven away. It was so ashamed of its bald head that it ran into a fox's hole and hid itself. When the fox came home, he saw a pair of great eyes looking at him in the darkness, which so frightened him that he ran back, and presently met a bear, who, perceiving how terrified Reynard appeared, said to him, What is the matter, brother fox, that you make such a face? Ah, he replied, in my hole sits a horrible beast, who glared at me with most fiery eyes. Oh, we will soon drive it out, said the bear, and going up to the hole, he peeped in himself, but as soon as he saw the fiery eyes, he also turned tail, and would have nothing to do with the terrible beast, and so took flight. On his way a bee met him, and soon saw he could not feel much through his thick coat, and so she said, You are making a very rueful face, Mr. Bear. Pray, where have you left your merry one? Why, answered Bruin, a great horrible beast has laid himself down in Reynard's house, and glares there with such fearful eyes that we cannot drive him out. Well, Mr. Bear, said the bee, I am sorry for you. I am a poor creature who you never notice, but yet I believe I can help you. So saying, she flew into the fox's hole, and settling on the clean-shaved head of the goat, stung it so dreadfully that the poor animal sprang up and ran madly off, and nobody knows to this hour where it ran to. What a funky little story. Stretch. Alright, I'm going to get some more water. Wow. Ugh, the words. Okay. Let's take a look at the next story. Oh, that's not too bad. Let's go ahead and read this one as well. Alright, this one is called Thumbling. Once upon a time, there lived a poor peasant who used to sit every evening by the hearth, poking the fire while his wife spun. One night he said, "How sad it is that we have no children. Everything is so quiet here, while in other houses it is so noisy and merry." "Ah," sighed his wife, "if we had but only one, and were he no bigger than my thumb, I should still be content and love him with all my heart." A little while after, the wife fell ill, and after 7 months a child was born, who, although he was perfectly formed in all his limbs, was not actually bigger than one's thumb. So they said to one another that it had happened just as they wished, and they called the child Thumbling. Every day they gave him all the food he could eat. Still he did not grow a bit, but remained exactly the height he was when first born. He looked about him, however, very knowingly, and showed himself to be a bold and clever fellow, who prospered in everything he undertook. One morning the peasant was making ready to go into the forest to fell wood, and said, "Now I wish I had some one who could follow me with the cart." "Oh, father," exclaimed Thumbling, "I will bring the cart. Don't you trouble yourself. It shall be there at the right time." The father laughed at this speech, and said, "How shall that be? You are much too small to lead the horse by the bridle." "That matters not, father. If mother will harness the horse, I can sit in his ear and tell him which way to take." "Well, we will try for once," said the father. And so when the hour came, the mother harnessed the horse and placed Thumbling in its ear, and told him how to guide it. Then he set out quite like a man, and the cart went on the right road to the forest, and just as it turned a corner, and Thumbling called out, "Steady, steady," 2 strange men met it, and one said to the other, "My goodness, what is this? Here comes a cart, and the driver keeps calling to the horse, but I can see no one." "That cannot be all right," said the other. "Let us follow and see where the cart stops." The cart went on safely deep into the forest, and straight to the place where the wood was cut. As soon as Thumbling saw his father, he called to him, "Here, father, here I am, you see, with the cart. Just take me down." The peasant caught the bridle of the horse with his left hand, and with his right took his little son out of its ear, and he sat himself down merrily on a straw. When the 2 strangers saw the little fellow, they knew not what to say for astonishment, and one of them took his companion aside and said, "This little fellow might make our fortune if we could exhibit him in the towns. Let us buy him." They went up to the peasant and said, "Will you sell your son? We will treat him well." "No," replied the man, "he is my heart's delight, and not to be bought for all the money in the world." But Thumbling, when he heard what was said, climbed up by his father's shirt, and set himself on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear, "Let me go now, and I will soon come back again." So his father gave him to the 2 men for a fine piece of gold, and then they asked him where he would sit. "Oh," replied he, "put me on the rim of your hat, and then I can walk round and survey the country. I will not fall off." They did as he wished, and when he had taken leave of his father, they set out. Just as it was getting dark, he asked to be lifted down, and after some demur, D-E-M-U-R, the man on whose hat he was took him off and placed him on the ground. In an instant Thumbling ran off and crept into a mouse hole where they could not see him. "Good evening, masters," said he. "You can go home without me. and with a quiet laugh he crept into his hole still further. The two men poked their sticks into the hole, but all in vain, for Thumbling only went down further, and when it had grown quite dark, they were obliged to return home, full of vexation and with empty pockets. As soon as Thumbling perceived that they were off, he crawled out of his hiding place and said, "How dangerous it is to walk in this field in the dark! One might soon break one's head or legs." And so saying, he looked round, and by great good luck saw an empty snail shell. "God be praised," he exclaimed, "here I can sleep securely." And in he went. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard two men coming by, one of whom said to the other, "How shall we manage to get at the parson's gold and silver?" "That I can tell you," interrupted Thumbling. "What was that?" exclaimed the thief, frightened. "I heard someone speak." They stood still and listened, and then Thumbling said, "Take me with you, and I will help you." "Where are you?" asked the thieves. "Search on the ground, and mark where my voice comes from," replied he. The thief looked about, and at last found him, and lifted him up in the air. What will you help us, you little wight, which is person or fellow?" Said they, "Do you see I can creep between the iron bars into the chamber of the parson and reach out to you whatever you require?" "Very well, we will see what you can do," said the thief. When they came to the house, Thumbling crept into the chamber and cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" The thieves were terrified and said, "Speak gently, and someone will awake." But Thumbling feigned not to understand, and exclaimed louder still, "Will you have all that is here?" This awoke the cook, who slept in the room, and sitting up in her bed she listened. The thieves, however, had run back a little way, quite frightened, but taking courage again, and thinking the little fellow wished to tease them, they came and whispered to him to make haste and hand them out something. At this Thumbling cried out still more loudly, "I will give you it all, only put your hands in." The listening maid heard this clearly, and springing out of bed, hurried out at the door. The thieves ran off as they were pursued by the wild huntsman, but the maid, as she could see nothing, went to strike a light. When she returned, Thumbling escaped without being seen into the barn, and the maid, after she had looked round and searched in every corner without finding anything, went to bed again, believing she had been dreaming with her eyes open. Meanwhile, Thumbling had crept in amongst the hay and found a beautiful place to sleep, where he intended to rest till daybreak, and then to go home to his parents. Other things, however, was he to experience, for there is much tribulation and trouble going on in the world. The maid got up at dawn of day to feed the cow. Her first walk was to the barn, where she took an armful of hay and just the bundle where poor Thumbling lay asleep. He slept so soundly, however, that he was not conscious, and only awoke when he was in the cow's mouth. "Ah, goodness!" exclaimed he, "however came I into this mill?" But soon he saw where he really was. Then he took care not to come between the teeth, but presently slipped quite down the cow's throat. "Where there are no windows in this room," said he to himself, "and no sunshine, and I brought no light with me." Overhead his quarters seemed still worse, and more than all he felt his room growing narrower, and the cow swallowed more hay, as the cow swallowed more hay. So he began to call out in terror as loudly as he could, "Bring me no more food. I do not want any more food." Just then the maid was milking the cow, and when she heard the voice, without seeing anything, and knew it was the same she had listened to in the night, she was so frightened that she slipped off her stool and overturned the milk. In great haste she ran to her master, saying, "Oh, Mr. Parson, the cow has been speaking." "You are crazy," he replied, but still he went himself into the stable to see what was the matter, and scarcely had he stepped in when Thumbling began to shout out again, "Bring me no more food, bring me no more food." This terrified the parson himself, and he thought an evil spirit had entered into his cow, and so ordered her to be killed. As soon as that was done, and they were dividing the carcass, a fresh accident befell Thumbling, for a wolf who was passing at the time made a snatch at the cow, and tore away the part that where he was stuck fast. However, he did not lose courage, but as soon as the wolf had swallowed him, he called out from inside, "Oh, Mr. Wolf, I know of a capital meal for you." "Where is it to be found?" asked the wolf. "In the house by the meadow. You must creep though the gutter, and there you will find cakes and bacon and sausages, as many as you can eat," replied Thumbling, describing exactly his father's house. The wolf did not wait to be told twice, but in the night crept in and ate away in the larder to his heart's content. When he had finished, he tried to escape by the way he entered, but the hole was not large enough. Thereupon Thumbling, who had reckoned on this, began to make a tremendous noise inside the poor wolf, screaming and shouting as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will awake the people." What?" cried the little man. "Since you have satisfied yourself, it is now my turn. It is my turn now to make merry." And he set up a louder howling than before. At last his father and mother awoke, and came to the room and looked through the kinks of the door. As soon as they perceived the ravages the wolf had committed, they ran and brought the man his axe, and the woman the scythe. "Stop you behind," said the man, as they entered the room. "If my blow does not kill him, you must give him a cut with your weapon and chop off his head if you can." When Thumbling heard his father's voice, he called out, "Father, dear, I am here, in the wolf's body. Heaven be praised," said the man, full of joy. "Our dear child is found again." And he bade his wife take away the scythe, lest it should do any harm to his son. Then he raised his axe and gave the wolf such a blow on its head that it fell dead. And taking a knife, he cut it open and released the little fellow, his son. "Ah," said his father, "what trouble we have had about you." "Yes, father," replied Thumbling, "I have been traveling a great deal about the world. Heaven be praised, I breathe fresh air again." "Where have you been, my son?" he inquired. "Once I was in a mouse's hole, once inside a cow, and lastly inside that wolf. And now I will stop here with you," said Thumbling. "Yes," said the old people, "we will not sell you again for all the riches in the world." And they embraced and kissed him with great affection. Then they gave him plenty to eat and drink, and had new clothes made for him, for his old ones were worn out with traveling. And thus ends that story. And I think I am going to end there. So I didn't end up reading too many stories today. But we're over at an hour and a half for the ASMR-like reading content. So hopefully that was interesting to you. Maybe some good background reading for you to listen to while you're working or what have you. And I will go ahead and end it here. I will see you all tomorrow. I hope you have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world. Don't forget to read a book, and just be warned, I don't know how much of a difference this is going to be with going into my ending screen with that music. I don't know how much of like a jump that's going to be in volume, so just be forewarned. Alright. Bye. Bye-bye.